Do my queen wave here. Yo soy la reina, sí. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I don't have Marco de la Garza here to say it perfectly. That was one of my deans at LA Valley College. I just loved it. In fact, I wanted that to be like my ringtone because he would just say the queen of the San Fernando Valley. I cannot do it justice, so I'm not even going to try. So welcome everyone to the Budget Forum. Well, actually, it's my forum, but the theme of this month is the governor's budget proposal for 23-24. So you are all going to just be astounded by the generosity of the governor. No, probably not. But this is really important, and because this is where we start kind of the sprint till we get to the May revise. So all the stuff you're going to see, CEOs like myself across the state are meeting with legislators saying, how can you take this money from us? What are you doing? And hopefully at the end, we'll get the things that we need, but we'll see. I think I saw yesterday that there's a proposal, or it's been decided that the taxes are not actually going to be received in April. They're going to give an extension on the federal side. So that doesn't help because it's important for the state to know what the feds are going to give them and how much federal money is coming in. So it's no bueno. But before we get started, I have some late breaking news. And that is, we are very fortunate to be joined by the person who's going to start as the Vice President of Student Services on Monday, March 6th. And she is right there, Dr. Brenda Ivelis. Yay! I'm not going to drag her up here and make her say a bunch of things. I'm going to let her just sit there quietly, have a cookie, and try to make sense of all of this. We will have plenty of opportunities to drive her crazy in the coming months, weeks, and years. So with that, and I don't know, are you doing this together or one at a time? Okay, so I have the fiscal dream team here. There used to be 3, but they got rid of 1, and now it's not a 3-legged stool anymore. I think you're you're each like one of the stilts, and together you're pretty high up there as the fiscal dream team. So with that, Vice President Candace Jones and our Chief Financial Officer, Jesse Wang.
So we knew we would see faces here today whenever we're talking about budget, and so we're super pleased that you guys are here to hear a little bit about what's going on at the state level. Super happy to meet in a minute, Brenda, when I go over. It's funny, so Jesse and I were sitting there, and then Erica gets up and she starts talking. I'm like, do you know who that is? And she's like, no. And I'm like, I don't either. And then granted, now we know. So welcome. We're super happy to have you here today. So Jesse and I are going to sort of tag team back and forth between some slides that we have prepared. I'm going to tag her in first. Boop. So she's going to lead us through some of the sort of budget calendar guidelines, and then I'll dip into some specifics as we get into sort of different programs and what they're thinking about it and talking about at the state level. And then we're going to end with our CARES funding. Lots of people want to know, like, hey, how is the institution doing as it relates to both our student and our institutional portion? And I promise there is a reason why we're bringing that up today as we talk about the governor's budget proposal. So, Jesse, how about it?
All right. Thank you, Candace. Hi, everyone. Okay, so we are talking about the governor's January budget proposal. So before we get into it, let's talk about what the budget calendars are. When things happen, there are things happening throughout the year, but not everything matters to us, but let's see what's going on in throughout the year. So starting July 1st, you all know that this is the first day of our fiscal year, and it's actually the first day of the state's fiscal year as well. And then when it comes to July and September, the departments and agencies kind of start to develop their budget proposal for the next fiscal year. So as soon as the new fiscal year starts, and they start thinking ahead for the next fiscal year. And then October to January, the governor and the Department of Finance started to develop their proposed budget, which is what we're going to talk about today. So it's the January budget proposal. It's being developed over 3 months from October to January. And then in November, the LAL, the Legislative Analyst Office, they kind of give their opinion about what they think the economy is heading, what's the status quo, where we might end up. So they look into their crystal ball and start seeing and thinking about where we're going to end up. And then all those information gets folded into the January 10th governor's release of their January budget. So, and then between January to February, then the budget is placed on the legislation. There's lots of review that happens after the January 10th release, lots of negotiation that's going to happen. And then that leads us into March to May. That's when the legislature begin the process of hearing and subcommittee hearing. There's lots of meetings that's happening. We love meetings, right? So then the state loves meeting too. They meet all the time. So they meet for like 3 months straight. And so about May 14th, that's when the governor provides an update, which you may have heard this term before. It's called the May Revise. So that encompasses things that are more up to date. So if the taxes were not extended this year, so they would have the tax information by May 14th, because taxes would traditionally be due, what, April 14th or April 15th. So, but this year we're going to have to see, because yesterday, the federal government extended, like Erica alluded to, that they extended their federal tax return. It's actually the quarterly tax payments to August. And it's not for the entire California. It's only for certain pockets of California that was affected by the weather storms, where they think that it was going to be affected. So we'll see how that folds out. And between May to June, legislators started hearing, because there are updates to the proposal that were provided in January that may or may not happen in May, or there may be new things that were added in May that was not in the January proposal. So that process takes place in May and June. But the goal is to have a legislative approved budget in June. That is the legislative deadline. If they don't pass it in June, no one at the state office gets paid. So that's their absolute deadline. And June 15th, and that's the Constitution deadline where we just talked about. And then July 1st, new fiscal year, and the process starts all over again. All right, so let's share. So we'd like to share with you some of the proposals that the state have given out as of the January budget. So currently, these are just proposals. It doesn't mean that they're going to be honored, or it doesn't mean they're going to be written into the final bill, but it's just some of the conversation they started out as of this January timeframe. So $400 million for base funding increase, and all of these only have to do with community colleges. $50 million for faculty and staff, $150 million to establish childcare. So you see, like, the titles are very, very generic. They're very broad. So because it's just a beginning of a conversation. And then we're talking about $30 million for technology needs for the colleges, $150 for one-time deferred maintenance. And we're going to talk about deferred maintenance. What happened to deferred maintenance this year in a little bit. And $900 million for one-time construction grants for student housing, and an unspecified one-time investment for pension relief. You know, this is why it's so high level, so preliminary, because there's the words that unspecified in there. All right, so we're going to start throwing numbers at you. So here's the first wave of numbers. So this wave of numbers is actually a projection for general fund revenue for the state. So this is the state. It's not PCC. This is the entire California state. So we are looking at a comparison between 22-23 and then what they think 23-24 is going to shake out. These are projections only. So far, the state is projecting that the revenue dollar that coming from personal income tax, which is the largest piece by far of the revenue source, is going to decrease by 2.1, and that's in millions. So it's about 1.7% of change. And then, cigarette tax, the percentage is very large. It doesn't take up a whole lot of percentage. It doesn't take up a whole lot of pie in this whole situation, but then, it is part.
You have a choice. Step up or use this.
Oh, sorry.
What's your choice?
Okay. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I didn't think I was going to be a traveler, but apparently I travel quite a bit. Okay, now I'm going to start traveling. Okay, so here's how it looks. But overall, we're talking about the state is still thinking that we're going to come out ahead in 23-24 when compared to 22-23, which is the year we're in right now. And you can see that this line is the Budget Stabilization Rainy Day Fund. So the state traditionally started with Governor Brown. They like to start preparing for the rainy day, start stashing revenues away when we have a little bit of surplus. So last year, or this year, we were able to stash away 1.6. And then in the coming year, because we are experiencing a little bit of uncertainty in the economy right now, they're projecting probably we're not going to be able to stash away as much as this year. Probably $911 million could be potentially stashed away. Okay. And here is a graphical presentation of what all the numbers that we just talked about. So for folks that likes pies, here's a big pie for you to all look at. The biggest piece of the pie is the personal income tax. And then followed by sales tax, corporate tax, and a little bit from all the other cigarette things that we just talked about, and then the insurance tax. All right.
Tag. Okay, so I asked to take the COLA slide, because that's why all y'all are here, is to hear a little bit about the cost of living adjustment. And so currently there's a proposal at the state level to increase our apportionment number by 8.13% for a cost of living adjustment, which then goes back, you sort of see it trickle down in terms of Prop 98 general fund with an expectation of a 0.5% enrollment growth, and then an increase, it gives you sort of the totals of what it's expecting across the system. Before I get into COLA, I want to show this because I have a question, and I think there are some people out here who are going to be able to answer this. So this, when we get a proposal related to COLA in particular, we also have a whole host of categorical funds that are not a part of the general fund, sort of the apportionment number that 8.13% gets applied to. And so this is currently what the state is projecting to apply the COLA amount to. And so I'm going to ask my secret shoppers out there, which categorical funds are not represented up there that you might be concerned about? That there are lots of positions. Well, Madam President, which categorical funds are not represented up there?
Student Equity and Achievement Program.
Oh my. Oh my, right? So we know that we use those funds judiciously to support a host of funding pieces across there. So if it is not applied to that particular source, guess what happens? Tito, what happens when the COLA is not applied to a particular categorical funded area?
I think you'll let us know right now.
No. Is what you say, boss? What's going on? What are we going to do? We have to then figure out, because we're not going to not give whatever COLA that gets negotiated through our union pieces to that particular funding sources. We don't say, well, because your position is funded using C program funds, sorry, you are not eligible for COLA. So for us, we are like all in the same boat, regardless of funding source. So that means that then the district has to figure out how we would cover any COLA negotiated increases on funds that have not been covered by the state. Okay, so keep that in mind. I also want to share a couple of things. So how many of y'all got a crazy gas bill? I was hot. I was mad. I was hot. Okay. That was hot. Yes. How many of you tried to buy a dozen eggs and thought, am I buying gold?
Oh, I got one.
Which one?
I got one.
Which one?
Thomas's English muffins. $6.
Okay. Okay, so think about that. So think about all of the things that we experience as homeowners and taxpayers and needing to manage our household incomes. So COLA, while it says cost of living adjustment, like I know that that's what it says, it is really an adjustment to our apportionment number to cover all of our increased costs. Not just our salary and benefit increased costs. I know that largely people think COLA equals employees. COLA equals increased cost to the district. And so just like your light bills at home are more expensive, or your utility and gas bills, or your water bills at home are more expensive, that is the exact same thing. We are not outside of the larger sort of economic framework for the world or the country. We're just not. Our bills are higher, right? Our utility bills are higher, our contract costs are higher, our furniture is higher. Everything that we purchase, I bet if you're purchasers out there, you're thinking, I bought this before and now it's more expensive. Yes. So those are increased costs to the district. So the COLA is actually applied to an apportionment number, which then is to cover all of our increased costs. So it's not that we're not sort of trying to think through how we can make sure that our employees are taken care of. It's that Jesse and I also have to think through how do we make sure that all of the district bills are paid, and that when your paycheck comes in, it actually cashes. I mean, we stay up at night over this stuff just to make sure that we're all good and solvent for the next few years, okay? All right, some other activity at the state level, so dual enrollment. So let's just check this one off. Check. We've done this. So there's a lot of conversation at the state level about making sure that colleges have dual enrollment programs and are growing those and have these local agreements. So check. We've done a really great job managing that expectation. The next one is there's been a lot of conversation at the state level around student enrollment and retention. So last year, we got, everything is currently in one-time funding forms, right? And so we received, building on it, so the second one says building on an investment of $150 million one-time Prop 98 pieces. There's an intentional, this year, the 23-24, is to have an increase of $200 million one-time Prop 8 to the general fund to continue to support our efforts at the college to bring students back, retain them, and make sure that they're getting through their program successfully. One thing I will say, though, as you think about this, what Jesse and I always watch the shells shift, right? So it's not like they just got $200 million. What they did was they just took it from deferred maintenance, okay? So last year, we received over $800 million in deferred maintenance funds. And those of you who watched that closely, like maybe some of my facilities folks out there, for years and years and years, we were not getting any deferred maintenance funds. So when things sort of go awry on campus, related to maybe something might be leaking somewhere or an elevator might be out, maybe, those are things that have historically been problematic because we had years where we were not getting any deferred maintenance funds, and it's only in these last 3 years where the state has recontributed and rededicated that focus in terms of passing colleges deferred maintenance. But in this case, we're like, wait. You just shuffled from deferred maintenance and put it back into student enrollment and retention fees. So you just reduced our deferred maintenance for next year, which we need. We can't think, folks think, oh, bond funding. Bond funding is really, we're reserving that for things that we are trying to reimagine how this place looks and feels and to transform. We're not trying to use that to simply say, hey, let's fix our elevators. That's what deferred maintenance funds are supposed to be for. And so when we don't get those funds, that's something that we have to very intentionally think about how we're going to, keep the district safe and these buildings operating in some sort of capacity. Enrollment. So we have been warned. The reason why I keep this here, because there is a budget impact, I promise. So the Chancellor's Office has, look at the wording. The administration will be monitoring. Every time you use that word monitoring, you're like, what does that mean? Monitoring district level enrollment trends as we move past COVID-19. So they have been very clear. They've been very clear that we need to regain our enrollments. We have to kick up our enrollment numbers or there are going to be some consequences to that, okay? Doesn't hit us until 25, 26, but we have to start planning for those pieces. So look at this other words. It is imperative, right? It is imperative that districts begin to regain some of its enrollment loss during the COVID-19 pandemic and that the administration will work with stakeholders to consider options, adjust district budgets, which usually means down, should a district not display that they are regaining enrollment loss during the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, so these are like little warning words, right? Look at the next one. In addition to responding to the enrollment declines in recent years, the administration has provided significant financial funding to support it. So, right, what does that say? We have given you money to get your enrollment back. Do you read the subtext there? We have supported you all to get your enrollment back. So we're watching that super closely. So we're trying to make really good decisions about how we move forward with budget decisions at the college because the groundwork has been laid. It is clear to us what's going to happen if we can't. And what that means is then in 25, 26, we get a new funding floor that will be sort of our hold harmless floor. That'll be it's basically like this. We have this student-centered funding formula. They'll calculate our enrollment and say how much apportionment we would have gotten. If that number exceeds our funding floor, we'll get that. Yay! If it does not, we will stick with our floor. If we stick with our floor, what does that mean? We are no longer eligible for COLA for any increases. That base is what our base is going to be, regardless of if the district's costs continue to increase. So they have laid the framework to say, please use our money strategically. Miriam back there, we do a lot with Motomatic and trying to get people back, and we got all these great outreach programs, David, Dr. Bolin, that are all working furiously to find creative ways to get our students back. But we need to start planning for if our floor stays the way it is, we've got to plan for that. Okay, we've got to make sure that the district continues to be able to maintain its operations with a funding floor that is set for us in 25, 26. I just want to show you a little trick. I only have this here not because we have student housing, but to show you something that, again, we're always watching. So 2 years ago now, the state made this big proclamation, we're going to support student housing, right? We love student housing. And the Budget Act had included, so it's the first one, the 2022 Budget Act included an intent language to have $1.8 billion one-time funds over a 2-year period, 23-24, 24-25, right? Yay! And then now we got this the budget proposes delaying $900 million planned in 23-24 to the 25-26 fiscal year and delaying the $250 million from 24-25 to the 25-26 fiscal year. So see how that works? There are often promises made at the state level, often. And yet, if we're not mindful that those things can change, we could be making decisions that would be really harmful for the district from a financial standpoint. So I just use this as an example of why we're always concerned about the budget. Make sense? Okay. All right. Last one. Oh, this is going to be hard. Okay, I'm just going to read it to you. So these are all of our COVID CARES HERF grants. There were like 100 of them, okay? The red are done. We've spent those funds. Blue, we'll talk about in a minute. But what I want you to see, the reason why we're talking about this today is because in 3 years, this district received over $100 million. 3 years, $100 million, okay? My guess is there are folks out there that we use these funds to fund some positions. We use these funds to fund technology purchases. I see my new CTO out there. We used it to, yes, we did. We use this to fund all sorts of health and safety things like masks and testing and, right? Think about all the money, $100 million in 3 years. It goes away on June 30th this year. So what do we then have to come up with ideas? We ought to figure out what can we continue to absorb, not even absorb, use this little small mini, I'm going to call it a mini grant. A mini grant is $9 million that somehow is supposed to manage this $100 million that we spent in 3 years. So Simon says, where is that money going to have to come out of? I'm just curious. No, we just say no to everybody? I'm down for that. I'm down. But I don't know that I'm going to get to make that final decision. Where would that money come from? Just out of curiosity. The general fund, our magic pool of funding resources that's 90% already allocated to positions, salary and benefits. So we've got to figure out creatively as a community what portions of things that were purchased using CARES Fund can actually go to the general fund, what sorts of things that were purchased using CARES Fund that could potentially move to the COVID block grant, but we've got to figure that out quickly, right? Quickly. Fortunately, the team, we've already started conversations, so rest assured we've got some ideas. But here's the last piece. These are the pieces that are still open. So people always say, Candace, how much CARES funding do we still have? Okay, so we've got really 2 buckets of the previous, the HERF $3, so both the institutional portion and the student portion. The balance of those are respective 4.3 million and 3.1 million that have to be expended before we get to June 30th of this year, okay? So we've been meeting, so David, Miriam, we've got a plan on the student portion. We've been meeting on the institutional portion to make sure that we've met our obligations so we could clear those pieces by June 30th of 2023, okay? And then we have this new little mini grant, because I'm going to call it a mini grant, because it's not $100 million, it's a mini grant that starts, and that is the 9.9, a little, about $10 million that we can move some of the CARES funding pieces to. But remember, that's like one time. That's all we got currently, at least expressed today. I hate ending on a sad note. I didn't think about that until I just said that last sentence, and then I was like, well, that's it. I don't really have anything else other than questions. But all that is to say, we really work diligently. The Fiscal Services Department, myself, in terms of planning and really trying to think through multi-year projections. We don't just think about what's right ahead of us in this next 6 months. We're really thinking in 3-5-year increments to make sure that this district, remains fiscally solvent and in a position to adjust if there are real issues related to any state conversation about a recession or issues of inflation, that we're really mindful and making really prudent decisions now so that in times when we're tightening our belts, that we can adjust and make sure that the people, the positions that the people in the positions that we're really able to continue to manage our operations going forward. And so, it may not always seem like, well, why did this? We always have a reason. Yeah, you convinced? Okay, we always have a reason of why we're doing what we're doing. And if you have questions about that, we're also always willing to answer any questions or give additional context about where we're at with the budget process. And that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Are there questions, though? Please. Okay.
A little bit of context. When several of the trustees and several students and I traveled to Sacramento at the end of January for the LEDGE conference, part of the visits that we made to legislators included going to the Department of Finance. And I'm bringing it up because one of the issues was the 8.13% COLA. And, the Department of Finance was like, look at us, we are giving you this really great COLA. And, we said, well, that's really great, except that it's kind of a problem because we have collective bargaining agreements that apply to all of our employees across the board. And I said, so, yes, it's great to have that 8.13%, but there are all of these people, there's all of these things. I said, and don't forget, you've redirected $200 million of deferred maintenance, so we got to make up that. And I said, why didn't you just do it across the board? And they said, well, last year in spring of 22, we gave a bump to each one of those programs. So we gave 5% more to C, and we gave 5% more, blah, blah, blah. And I said to the Department of Finance people, I said, yes, you did, and we really appreciated that. And you know what we did? We took that money and we expanded the services that we provide to students. Like, we didn't see that as a cost of living. We saw that as, we're giving you additional money, so please provide additional services. So we've done that, and now we're kind of almost paying the price for it. So that's one issue. I think the second issue, and I like the way that you were where you were going through the wording of what the Chancellor's office talked about in terms of, we want you to do this, we want you to do this, and that all goes back to what they call the roadmap, or the agreement they made with the governor's office last spring. And so one of the reasons that we got those additional dollars, both to the base as well as to those programs, was the idea that we were going to ramp up all of our efforts on the Vision for Success goals. I mean, that was the goal. And so a lot of what happens with the Chancellor's office, and Candace and Jesse really know this, is it's like the carrot and the stick. Like, they put out that carrot, right? And then when you don't do what they think you're supposed to do, they hit you with the stick. And so that's kind of where we are right now. I think the budget advocacy that's happening across the state is a little bit uneven, because there are entities across the state saying, let's go for that full COLA. We'll figure out the details with those programs that aren't covered. There are some CEOs like me who say, you know what, let's think about lowering the COLA and having it apply to everyone, because what we have to make up for is just a little bit on the crazy side. And then the last thing I'm going to comment on has to do with the funding floor, with the student-centered funding formula. There is a lot of debate right now happening at the state as to what that funding floor actually means. Because when we were in that meeting in the Department of Finance, I brought up the COLA and the fact that if you add together this year's COLA as well as the last 2 years' COLA, or 3 years, that would be 23% COLA. And some of the original language coming out about that hold harmless was that if you didn't meet that student-centered funding formula base for 25-26, what you were going back to was what you had in 2017 with no COLAs. And the Department of Finance folks said, well, wait a minute, that's not what we meant. What we meant is 2017-18, whatever your revenue was, plus the COLA you've gotten to 24-25, and that's the floor. I said, okay, well, that's not entirely clear to everyone. And then we took it a step further. I said, and the other issue is that even if you have that 17-18 as your base, we've all lost enrollment since 2017-18. And so the idea that we can all get back to whatever that funded base was in 17-18, plus the COLA for 24-25, and they said, but we're talking about your revenue. I said, yes, and the chancellor's office is saying that it's your enrollment which creates your revenue. And the Department of Finance said, oh, that's not what we meant. So right now, the chancellor's office is talking in terms of enrollment and 2017, and the Department of Finance is talking in terms of revenue 27-18. So there's a little bit of conversation happening right now to try to clarify that, because there's a huge difference between your revenue that support your enrollment that supported your revenue in 2017-18 versus just here was the revenue you got and this is your floor over here. So there is some conversation. The last thing I'm going to say, just my own perspective here, the suggestion that in 25-26, the only college districts that will get a COLA will be those who meet all of the requirements of the student-centered funding formula, I don't believe that for a second. I just don't believe it. They can say it. I don't believe it, because that is a huge hit to the system, a huge hit. And we'll see. Stay tuned on that one. TBD. But anyway, I just wanted to offer those additional perspectives. But I'm sure somebody has a question for Candace and Jesse. Okay, there we go. Mr. Bucklehigh.
I promise it's a friendly. There we go. I promise it's a friendly. So on this chart you have here that you said was bad news, in the bottom in purple, I see numbers as of February 24th, 2023 that are larger than 0, which is good. And I see a spend down number, a date on those numbers of June 30th. I assume that everybody who is a leadership team member at this college has a spend down plan for these COVID funds that have to be spent by June 30th that's going to match with our budget calendar so we don't have last minute requests coming into the budget department to spend that money.
I appreciate that question. So yes, we have actually, for the student portion, we've met with both Miriam and David, and they have a plan on expending those funds by the date that we discussed. We had lots of great ideas. They've already been doing a lot of that. It's interesting, and I don't want to speak for them, but even students who receive funds, they all don't always accept it. Like, so we give it to them, and then all of a sudden we're sitting there on this money, and we're like, please take it, please, you're supposed to take it, and for whatever reasons they don't. So both of those minds back there are just constantly thinking through ideas like, well, what's plan B? What's plan C? You know, how do we engage students who may not have responded, or how do we turn that funding to others? So they've got really great ideas about how to get through that final $4 million. And then we have plans for the remaining 3. Now the new $10 million doesn't have a deadline of 6/30. So that new funding that we just received, so it's really about a little under $8 million that we have to expend before the end of the fiscal year, which for my purchasing folks, if they're watching, the deadline for purchasing will be like at the end of March 30th. So just put that in your little calendar minds. But yeah, we do, thank you. We have ideas about how we're going to expend those funds to make sure we're compliant. Other questions? There's one back there. All right, Jesse, get your steps in.
Okay, well, kind of given the volatility happening in, the economic environment, has any of the entities that kind of talk about the budget talked or even mentioned any type of likelihood of mid-year cuts or any type of scenario or risk for that?
Not to date. There hasn't been anything sort of expressed in how they would talk about that. Jesse, do you want to talk about the deficit factor, though, in a little bit? Like if there was a shortfall, how the state would manage something like that?
Sure. So
It's funny, we were just talking about it. It's like the perfect question because we just had a great conversation about that.
So the chancellor's office, when they do the calculation for revenue, so that it comes in so we get a slither of the pie from the whole state. And then that slither doesn't really change for us. But then, however, there's many variations within our system, such as enrollment. Somebody might have an enrollment growth, somebody have an enrollment drop. So there's many moving factors to manage this slither of the pie. So when somebody, and our funding formula is designed in a way that it doesn't have a cap. We could earn as much as our enrollment could bring us. And then we could talk about, if we were for superstars and we get like 10% growth in enrollment, we could be seeing a 10% technically growth in our revenue. But however, we're bound by this pie. So when the pie, when everybody earns more, what the pie is able to provide for everybody, the chancellor's office play with this number called the deficit factor. So which means this is the percentage of revenue that we don't have to pay everybody. So we could be looking at, okay, we could be, let's say, 8.13% COLA this year, but if the shortfall comes in like at 1%, then in reality, we may only realize 7% of a COLA. So that's how they manage to play around and fulfill all the needs within the system with the slither of pie that they were given.
Has the state ever figured out how much it would actually cost to fully fund the student-centered funding formula?
I don't believe so, and I don't think they will have an idea until they come up with the next set of funding formula.
I agree with you.
This is a trick question.
Thank you. No, mine's a quick one, but
Because he's going to his phone, look like he's got some question there.
I wrote it down. I don't want to misword myself. But you practically have answered most of it. But in layman's terms, in 2020 to 2023, the state approved and allocated COLA at 6%. And for the most part, the college has already adhered to that for most of the bargaining units. And it seems like in 23-24, we're going to have an additional 8.13%, according to what's being proposed, not necessarily approved, for 23-24. And part of what you discussed, it makes sense that those costs might be applied to a general increase as far as the expenses of the college. But will it, in all reality, will the staff, or whatever, because I know we're going to get these questions after folks watch this, legitimately expect to see also a COLA increase for 23-24 in any capacity?
So that's a negotiation item, right? So each of the bargaining units would meet with our chief negotiator, which is Mr. Robert Blazinski. I'm going to call his name out because he's the chief negotiator. So they would enter into conversations with him about any sort of proposed COLA. They are currently in negotiations with POA, and our faculty association have not closed their negotiation contracts. So it's possible during their negotiations that they're negotiating the 23-24 and even the 23-24 and the 24-25. Those conversations are on the table. For CFT, CSEA, both of them opened their contracts back up, I think, in June of this year. So my guess is there's going to be conversations about a COLA increase for both of those bargaining units as well. Okay. I'm running. You got like 30 seconds before we... All right. Well, thank you. We'll hang out if you guys need us. We appreciate you.